The city is on fire. The man who can put it out is not allowed inside. 390 BC. Rome. Camillus is in exile when the Gauls arrive. This is Roman nights. We go back. We listen. We stay a while. 6 years before the fire. The mud comes first. 1. The city that would not fall. 6 years before the fire. A different city is burning. And Rome is the one holding the torch. The city is called Veii. It is visible from the Roman lines. That is the worst of it. 10 miles north of Rome, up on its rock, the great Etruscan city sits and looks down. It looks down at the men who have come to take it. It is not far. On a clear day, a man in the trench can see the smoke from its kitchens. He can see people moving on the walls. He has been able to see them for 10 years. Veii is the rival. It has always been the rival. Older than Rome, richer than Rome, and for most of their long quarrel, stronger than Rome. The two cities sit on either side of the Tiber like two men at a table. Two men who have decided that only one of them will leave. They have fought over the river crossings. They have fought over the salt beds at the mouth. They have fought over a town called Fidene until the name itself meant grief. Rome has wanted Veii dead for as long as there has been a Rome to want it. And now Rome is going to get it. Slowly. The way you get everything that takes 10 years. A siege is not a battle. That is the thing the songs never tell you. A battle is loud and it is over. A siege is quiet and it is not. A siege is mud and waiting. It is the slow grinding of two cities against each other, until one of them wears through. There is no glory in it. There is a man in a ditch. The man has been in the ditch since before his son could walk. The son can walk now. The Romans have learned things in these 10 years that no Roman learned before. They have learned to keep an army in the field through the winter. That had never been done. A Roman army went home for the harvest. It always had. You could not ask a farmer to leave his land for a year, 2 years, 10 years, and then still call him a farmer when he came back. So the Senate did the thing that changed everything. It began to pay the soldiers a wage from the public treasury, so that a man could stay in the trench and still feed the family he was not home to feed. That wage will matter. Hold it somewhere. It is the first thread in the knot that ends this season. For now it means only this. The army does not go home. The siege does not stop for winter. Veii has no relief and no rest, and neither do the men outside its walls. Both cities are being eaten from the inside by the same long teeth. 10 years. Troy was 10 years. The Romans know this. They are not a people who miss a comparison like that. A city that cannot be taken. A siege that will not end. The best men of a generation grown old in the mud of a foreign field. They have started telling the story to themselves the way the Greeks told theirs. There is even a flood involved. A strange oracle about a lake. A captured priest who knows the secret no one wants to hear. The Romans love it. A people will forgive a war almost anything if it sounds like a poem. But a poem does not breach a wall. By the 10th year the patience is gone. At Rome the question has stopped being whether Veii will fall and started being who failed to make it fall. The command has passed from man to man. Each one inherits the same mud and leaves it to the next. The trench gets no closer to the city. The city gets no closer to surrender. Something has to break the shape of the thing, and the ordinary magistrates, changing every year, cannot do it. A siege does not respect a one-year term. It just waits the man out the way it waits everyone out. So the Senate reaches, as it has reached before, for the oldest tool in the box. A dictator. One man. All the power. For 6 months. Listen, because the next part is the whole season. They name Marcus Furius Camillus. The name should be said carefully. By the end you will have watched the city do 3 things to him. Love him, exile him, beg him back. All in the space of a few years. Know from the start who it is the city does all of that to. Camillus is the best soldier Rome has. There is no argument about it. Not even from the men who hate him. And there are men who hate him. He is from one of the old families, the Furii. But he has made his own name in the field, not in the forum. He is a believer. He prays before he moves. He sacrifices before he prays. He does not take a step the gods have not been asked to bless. The Romans like that in a general. A pious general is a careful general, and a careful general brings their sons home. He is also proud. Hold that too. It does not show yet. It will. The same care that makes him pray over every decision makes him certain, underneath, that his decisions are blessed. A man who has the gods on his side 100 times begins to forget something. Very quietly. He forgets the difference between the gods being on his side and his side being right. It is the most ordinary mistake a great man makes. Camillus is going to make it in front of everyone. But that is 6 years off. Tonight he is only the man the Senate has sent to end the longest siege in Rome's history. He comes up the road from the city to the lines. The soldiers in the trench watch him come. They have watched a lot of men come up this road over 10 years. They have learned not to hope too hard. He rides to the edge of the works and he gets down and he looks at Vi on its rock. The light is going. It is the cold end of an autumn day. The walls of the enemy city stand black against a sky the color of a knife. Somewhere up there a fire is being lit for someone's supper. The way it has been every evening for 10 years. The way it is being lit at this same hour in Rome. In every city. In every house where someone is still alive to be cold and hungry and want the day to end. Camillus stands in the mud and looks at the city that will not fall. He does not look like a man making a plan. He looks like a man listening. To the wind off the rock. To the small sounds of his own camp settling behind him. To something under the ground, maybe, that no one else can hear yet. Then he turns and walks back to the tents to pray. Behind him the city sits on its rock. Lit gold for a moment at the very top, where the last sun catches the temple roof. And then not lit at all. The temple is the temple of Juno. Remember her. She is going to leave that rock before this is over. And the way she leaves it is one of the strangest things Rome ever did. But first the rock has to be opened. And Camillus is not going to open it the way the last 10 commanders tried to open it. He is going to go under it. 2. The tunnel under the goddess. You cannot take Vi from above. 10 years have proved it. The walls are high and the rock is higher. The gates have held against everything Rome could throw at them. Camillus stands at the works and he does not look at the walls. He looks at the ground. The ground is the way in. There is a word for what he decides to do. The Romans call it a cuniculus, a mine, a tunnel driven through soft rock toward the heart of a thing you cannot break from outside. The engineers had used them before to drain a flooded lake, to move water under a hill. Camillus turns the tool around. He does not want to move water. He wants to move men. Under the wall. Under the rock. Up into the city itself from below. No wall has ever been built there. No one builds a wall against the earth. The digging begins. It is the worst work in any army. Ask the men who do it. A soldier dreams of the open field, the line, the charge, the clean thing his grandfather told him about. This is not that. This is the dark. This is a man on his belly in a space too small to turn around in. He scrapes rock by the light of a lamp. The lamp eats the air he needs to breathe. The roof is the weight of a city. He can feel it. Every man down there can feel it. They work in shifts because no man can hold the dark that long. They pass the broken rock back hand to hand. Down a chain of bodies in the black, out to the light. Other men carry it away. So the spoil heap does not tell the enemy what is happening under their feet. It is slow. It is slow the way the whole siege has been slow. But worse, now the slowness is underground, and you cannot see it move. A man comes off shift and he cannot say how far they got. A hand's width. 2. The rock gives what it gives. But the rock is giving. And up above, in the city that does not know the earth beneath it is being eaten, life goes on. The defenders man the walls. They watch the Roman lines. They have watched the Roman lines for 10 years. The lines have never once come closer. And so the defenders have learned the most dangerous thing a besieged city can learn. They have learned to feel safe. The tunnel reaches the rock under the citadel. Under the citadel is the temple. The greatest temple in VI. The temple of Juno, the queen of the gods. The goddess the Veientines have prayed to for as long as there has been a VI to pray. Her image stands in the dark of the inner room. And below the floor of that room, close now, close enough to hear, are Romans. Here the story turns strange. It is one of those moments where the history and the legend lie down together. They refuse to be separated. The honest thing is to tell it the way Rome told it and let you weigh it. The way Rome told it is this. On the day the tunnel reached the temple floor, the king of VI was inside, making sacrifice. An old king, a careful king, doing the thing a king does when his city is dying around him. He was offering an animal to Juno, and the priest who read the entrails spoke an oracle over the king's shoulder. The kind of thing priests say, half to the god and half to the room. He said that the one who cut and offered the inner parts of this beast would have the victory. He meant the king. Of course he meant the king. The Romans under the floor heard it. You can decide for yourself how a man under a stone floor hears words spoken in a temple above him. Maybe the floor was thin. Maybe the story is too good to be only true. The Romans did not care, then or after. They heard it, and they did the thing the oracle demanded. They broke up through the floor, into the holy dark. They took the offering off the altar and out of the king's hands. A Roman cut it and offered it. The victory went to the one who made the offering. The oracle did not say which side. The Romans made sure it was theirs. That is the way Rome chose to remember it. A god's own words, turned against the god's own city, by men coming up out of the ground. What is certain is simpler and just as terrible. They came up inside the walls. It is over very fast once that happens. A city's whole strength is its wall. And the wall means nothing once the enemy is behind it. The men in the tunnel pour up into the citadel. The gates are thrown open from the inside. The army that has waited 10 years in the mud comes through them. All of it all at once. 10 years of waiting turned loose in a single afternoon. What happens to VI after that is what happens to a city taken by storm. The histories say it plainly and then look away. There is a mercy in looking away. The details are the details of every sacked city that ever was. The fighting in the streets. The houses entered. The people who were a great and ancient people in the morning and were spoiled by the evening. VI was older than Rome. VI was richer than Rome. By nightfall VI was a name, a quantity of plunder, a long line of people who would be sold. A soldier in the streets that evening would have walked through rooms grander than any room in Rome. One of the men who had spent 10 years in the trench. Etruscan rooms. Painted walls, the colors still wet-looking in the lamplight. Dancers and birds and feasts. Painted by people who thought their city would stand forever. He would have taken what he could carry. They all did. It was owed to him 10 years of it. He did not look long at the paintings. The plunder was past counting. So much that it broke something in Rome later, the having of it, but that is for the next chapter. For now there is only the goddess. Camillus is a pious man. He does not enter the temple of Juno as a looter. He enters it as a man who has just done a thing to a goddess. a man who needs to make it right. Because here is the Roman logic. It is so unlike how we think. Rome did not believe it had defeated Juno. Rome believed Juno had let Vi fall. A city's gods were the city's defense, more than any wall. If the wall failed, the gods had withdrawn. And a goddess who has withdrawn from one city can be invited to another. So the Romans did the thing they called evocatio, the calling out. Before the storm or at it, a Roman would stand and call out. He would formally invite the enemy's chief god to leave the doomed city and come to Rome instead. Better temples, better honors, people who would not lose. It is the coldest theology imaginable, and the Romans meant every word of it. You do not just take a city's land and people and gold. You take its god. You leave it nothing to pray to. That is how Rome won, not only on the field, in the temple with a god under each arm walking home. Now they have to move her. Young men are chosen for it. The histories are careful about this. Not just any soldier. Young men, washed, dressed in clean white, hands purified. The way you would choose someone to lift a sleeping child you did not want to wake. They go into the inner room where the image of Juno has stood in the dark for centuries. They put their hands on her, and one of them asks her a question, half as a joke and half not. The way a frightened young man speaks to a thing too large for him. He asks the goddess if she wants to go to Rome. The story says she nodded. Some say she nodded. Some say she spoke and said yes, she would. Some say the men only felt her come away from her base, lighter than a thing of that size has any right to be, as if she had decided to be carried. The Romans told all three versions and did not trouble to choose. They wanted it to be true that the goddess agreed. A goddess who is taken is loot. A goddess who agrees to come is a gift, and a sign, and a blessing on everything that follows. So she agreed. They needed her to, and so she did. They carry her down off the rock, the image of the queen of the gods, leaving the city that loved her for 10 lifetimes, riding out on the clean hands of the men who took it. Below her the city she is leaving is dark in places and burning in others. The streets are full of the sounds a sacked city makes, which are not sounds anyone wants described. She does not look back. Painted gods never do. They only ever look ahead. At the next temple, the next people. The next city that thinks its god belongs to it. She will get a temple in Rome. A good one on the Aventine. The Romans will keep their promise to her, because Rome always kept its promises to gods. It was the only kind of promise Rome was truly afraid to break. Camillus comes down the rock last, the way a careful man does. The work finished, the god secured. The longest siege in his city's history ended by his hand. 10 years. 10 commanders. He is the one who did it. He went under the unconquerable thing and came up inside it and took even its goddess. He has done something no Roman has done. He must know it. He stands at the bottom of the rock in the smoke of the burning city. And he is, in this hour, the greatest man in Rome. It is the highest he will ever stand. Everything after this is the long way down. 3, 4 white horses. The triumph is the highest day a Roman can have. There is nothing above it. A general who has won a great war is given a single day to be more than a man. He rides through the city in a painted chariot. His face is reddened to the color of the old terracotta god on the Capitol. A slave stands behind him holding a crown over his head. The slave says the one thing into his ear, all day, over the noise of the whole city. Remember, you are a man. They had to put a man behind him to say it. On this one day the line is so thin that a man might forget. Camillus has earned his day. No one says he has not. He took the city no one could take. He gets his triumph. And he ruins it before the gate. He comes into Rome in a chariot drawn by 4 white horses. You have to understand what that meant. It is hard for us. To us a white horse is only a fine horse. To a Roman it was not. White horses, for of them yoked to a chariot belong to the gods, to the sun, to Jupiter himself in the old images, the king of heaven crossing the sky. No man drove 4 white horses through Rome. It had never been done. A triumphing general was already brushing the edge of the divine for one day, already wearing the god's red face, already needing a slave to remind him he would die. To climb into the god's own chariot, behind the god's own horses, was to step over the edge entirely. The crowd cheers because a crowd cheers a triumph. But underneath the cheering something goes quiet. They saw a man tell them, without a word, what he thought he was. Not the best of them, above them, not first among the citizens but a thing apart, a thing the white horses were made to carry. Rome had thrown out its kings for less. Rome had built its whole self around the terror of one man rising above the rest. And here was the man who had just saved them, riding the chariot of heaven through the heart of the city. On the one day when no one could tell him to get down, they cheered. They remembered. People can do both at once. They are very good at it. He did not see it. That is the thing to hold onto because it is the whole of him. He did not climb into that chariot to insult them. He climbed into it because it felt right. He had done a divine thing, ending the unendable siege, taking even the goddess. A divine thing seemed to him to deserve a divine carriage. The horses fit the deed in his own mind. The fit was perfect. That was the problem. He could feel the rightness of it from the inside so completely. He could not feel how it looked from the street. He had taken the city no one could take. He could not see why gratitude should have a limit. The 4 white horses had felt entirely appropriate to him. That was the trouble. A man who cannot see his own pride has nothing to defend himself with when it arrives. It does not feel like pride from the inside. It feels like accuracy. It feels like a man simply taking the size he has earned. He drove 4 gods' horses through Rome and felt modest doing it. In his own accounting, the deed was larger than the horses. He was not lying to the city. He was telling it exactly what he believed. That was worse. The white horses are the first crack. The gold is the second, and the gold is what finishes him. Before the walls of Veii, in the long siege, Camillus had made a vow. If the city fell, he would give 1/10 of the plunder to the god Apollo, to the great shrine far away across the sea, at Delphi. It is the kind of vow a pious man makes in a hard hour. The trouble is that he made it and then the city fell and the plunder was already gone. It was gone into the hands of the soldiers. 10 years of soldiers. They had taken it room by room on the day of the storm. They had carried it home. It was theirs. The way a thing you have bled 10 years for is yours. And now the general who let them take it stood up. He said 1/10 of all of it belonged to a god across the sea. They would have to give it back. Open the chests they had only just filled. Count out 1/10 of everything and hand it over to the priests. To be shipped to a shrine most of them would never see. For a god who had not been in the trench with them. You can imagine how that landed. It is a small thing and it is not a small thing. It is the kind of small thing that brings down great men. Not the battle. Not the siege. The accounting afterward. The 10th part. The sense spreading through the army and then the city. The great Camillus had grown too large. He rode the gods' horses and reached into the soldiers' chests. A man who took that much for the gods might be taking some for himself. And then someone says it out loud. A charge. The exact shape of it is lost the way these things are lost. Something about the VI plunder, about bronze doors. About wealth that should have gone to the treasury and went somewhere else instead. Embezzlement in the plain word. The hero of VI, accused of stealing from the city he handed VI to. Whether it was true almost does not matter. By the time it was spoken, the white horses had already made it easy to believe. A man who would ride the chariot of Jupiter would help himself to a god's tenth. The crowd that had gone quiet at the gate had its reason now. The trial is coming. He can count the votes. A pious man, careful, who reads the entrails before he moves, can read this too. He is going to be convicted. The city he saved is going to find him guilty. It will fine him a sum that will ruin him or worse. He does not wait for it. He chooses to go before they can make him go. There is a kind of pride even in that, in refusing to stand and be judged by people he had carried. The pride is the same pride as the horses, only turned inward now and gone cold. His friends come to the house. They come the way friends come to a house where something has ended. They want to stand around him in the vote and shield him with their own standing. He sends them away. He will not be acquitted by other men's mercy. He goes out through his own door in the morning, the way Cincinnatus went out to his field, except that the field is gone, and there is no field waiting, only the road out, and a town called Allia, where a man can live who is no longer welcome where he was born. At the gate, the histories say he stopped. He turned and looked back at the city, and he prayed, or he cursed, depending on who is telling it. The two are very close together in a man like this on a morning like this. He asked the gods one thing: if he was being wronged, if the city was casting out a man who had only ever served it, then Rome should be made to miss him. Quickly, he asked that they make Rome want him back, and feel the wanting, and know exactly what it had thrown away. It is the prayer of a proud man. A man who has nothing left to be proud of but the wrong done to him. He should have been more careful what he asked for. He of all men, who prayed over everything, who never moved without the gods. He asked the gods to make Rome need him. The gods were listening. Far to the north, a sound he could not hear was already coming south. Iron, a great deal of it, coming for the city that had just sent away the one man who might have stood in front of it. He walks out the gate and down the road to Allia and does not look back again. Behind him the city goes on. The stalls open. The forum argues about the next thing. No one feels the cold spot yet, where the best soldier in Rome used to stand. They will feel it soon. For a quarrel in the north. Something new is coming over the mountains. Rome does not know it yet. Rome is busy with itself, with the gold of Vi and the trial of Camillus, with the ordinary noise of a city that thinks it knows every enemy worth fearing, the ones it can already name. The thing coming over the mountains has no place in any Roman story. It does not appear in the old wars. It is not Etruscan, not Latin, not Sabine. Not any of the neighbors Rome has spent 3 centuries learning to hate by habit. It is the Gauls. They came from the cold side of the Alps and beyond, and they were big. That is the first thing every account says, the thing that comes before strategy or numbers. Big men, taller than Romans, fair where Romans were dark, with hair limed stiff and white and faces painted for war. They fought half naked or naked, some of them. They threw off the very armor a Roman trusted his life to, as if the body itself were the boast. They came on with a noise, horns, long and harsh, and a sound the men made together that was not words. It rose and fell along the whole length of the line, until the ground seemed to carry it. A Roman heard that sound and felt something move in his stomach that drill could not train out of him. It was older than discipline. It was the thing the body knows before the mind is told. These were the Senans, one tribe among many, led by a chief the Romans would remember by one name, Brennus. It may have been a title and not a name, the way some of these things turn out to be. It does not matter. To Rome it became a name, and the name became a wound. It started with a different city's trouble. Far up north, An Etruscan town called Clusium found the Gauls at its gates. Clusium was not Rome's friend, particularly. Etruscan cities rarely were. But Clusium was frightened. Frightened cities reach for the nearest power. And the nearest power that was not the thing at the gate was Rome. So Clusium sent to Rome and asked for help. Rome did the careful thing. Rome did not send an army. Rome sent ambassadors. 3 of them brothers from the great house of the Fabii. Their task was simple and honorable. Go north, stand between the 2 sides, find out what the Gauls wanted, and try to talk them off. It is the oldest tool of a power that would rather not fight. Send 3 respected men and some words and hope the words are enough. The words might have been enough. Brennus, when they put the question to him, gave an answer that was almost reasonable. Reasonable in the hard way these things are reasonable. He said the Gauls wanted land. Clusium had more land than it could work. Let Clusium give up some of what it was not using. The Gauls would take it and there would be no war. The Romans, he is supposed to have said, had done the very same thing themselves. They had taken from neighbors who were weaker. He was not wrong about that. He had simply said out loud the thing Rome preferred not to hear said. That should have been the end of the embassy. A hard answer carried home for the Senate to chew on. It was not the end. It was the beginning, and the men who began it were the ambassadors themselves. Here is the thing an ambassador is. He is a man who is not allowed to fight. That is the whole of his protection and the whole of his use. He carries no weapon that matters. He stands between armies precisely because everyone agrees not to touch him. The moment he picks up a spear, he stops being an ambassador. He becomes a soldier, and a soldier has no immunity at all. Every people in the ancient world understood this. It was older than treaties. It was the thin sacred rule that let enemies talk at all. The Fabii broke it. When the talking failed, Clusium and the Gauls came to blows outside the walls. The 3 Roman ambassadors did not stand aside. They joined the fight. One of them, the histories agree on this, rode into the line and killed a Gaulish chieftain, and was recognized doing it. An ambassador killing a leader of the people he had been sent to make peace with. There is no version of that which is not a violation. The men whose whole job was to keep the war from starting had started it with their own hands. Brennus did not march at once. He did the lawful thing first, which is the detail that makes everything after it so much worse. He sent his own envoys to Rome. He demanded that the Fabii be handed over for what they had done. Not war, justice. He asked Rome to enforce the very law Rome claimed to live by. Surrender the men who broke the truce, and the matter is closed. It was a reasonable demand, and Rome knew it. The priests who guarded such things, the men whose office was the law between peoples, said it plainly. The Fabii were in the wrong and should be given up. The case was not difficult. The case was embarrassingly clear, and Rome refused. Worse than refused. The Fabii were not punished. They were not even quietly retired. The people, when the matter came to them, elected all 3 of the offending brothers to high military office. For the coming year, they took the men who had broken the sacred law and put them in command of armies. It was not an accident or a confusion. It was a choice made in the open by the assembled citizens. They looked at the demand for justice and they answered it with a promotion. That is the question that should sit in your chest. It is the question the whole season has been circling. Why does a careful, lawful, God-fearing people throw away the one rule that might have saved it? Because they were proud. Because the Fabii were one of their own great houses. And you do not hand your own great house over to a pack of giants from beyond the mountains. Whatever the law says. Because they had just taken VI and felt large. Because the men at the gate did not look like a real threat. Only like savages with loud horns. And Rome had beaten savages before. Because the law that protects an ambassador is easy to honor when honoring it costs nothing. The first time it costs something real, a proud people discover something. It discovers how thin its love of the law actually was. It is the same disease exactly as the white horses. A man too large to see how he looks. A city too large to imagine it can be made to pay. Camillus rode the god's chariot and could not feel the danger. Rome promoted the men who broke the truce and could not feel the danger. The general and the city had the same blindness in the same year. One had already been punished for it. The other was about to be. Brennus got his answer. The answer was not the Fabii. The answer was an insult, delivered in the open, by a city that thought itself beyond consequence. He had asked for justice and been handed contempt. So he did the thing he had not done first. The thing he could have been talked out of and now could not. He turned the whole tribe south. Not toward Clusium. Clusium did not matter anymore. The quarrel was no longer about a town that needed land. It was about a city that thought it could break the law to a Gaul and suffer nothing. Brennus pointed the horns at the only target that would answer the insult. Rome. He is supposed to have kept good order on the march, which is its own kind of frightening. The picture Rome later kept was of a horde, a flood, a wave of chaos. The truth that frightened them more, once they had time to think, was simpler. The Gauls came on in a column, fast. They did not stop to plunder the farms along the road. They ignored the smaller towns. They wanted one thing only, and went straight for it. A mob you can outlast. A flood drains away. Something that walks past everything else to come for you alone is not a flood. It is a decision. The decision was 40 miles off and closing. And the city it was coming for had just sent away the one man who had ever beaten the unbeatable. He was in Ardea, finishing nothing, waiting for a prayer to be answered. It was about to be. 5. The river called Allia. There is a small river 11 miles north of Rome. Before that day it had no fame. It was a stream that fed the Tiber, a line of water across the road the Gauls were walking down. After that day every Roman knew its name and wished he did not. The Allia. They would mark the day on the calendar in black. The day of the Allia. For centuries no Roman would begin anything important on it. A whole people learned to flinch at a date. This is the day they learned it. Rome sent everything. The histories quarrel about the numbers, and the numbers do not matter. What matters is the feeling the men carried out the gate. They were Romans. They had taken Veii. They had beaten Etruscans and Latins and Sabines and hill tribes without count. The thing coming down the road was big and loud and strange. But it was, in the Roman mind, only another tribe of savages. And Rome did not lose to savages. The army marched out to the Allia carrying its whole history on its back. And its whole history told it that it would win. That certainty is a kind of armor. It is also a kind of blindness. The men who feel it do not dig in as carefully. They do not respect the ground. They line up the way they always line up. Against an enemy they have decided in advance is beneath them. And they wait for the part where the enemy breaks and runs. Because the enemy always breaks and runs. This enemy did not know it was supposed to. He stands in the Roman line on the slope above the river. He is a citizen, a farmer most of the year. He has done this before and lived. The shield is heavy on his arm in the way he knows. The man on his right he has known since boyhood. The smell is the smell of every battle morning. Crushed grass, iron. The sour thing his own body makes when it is afraid and pretending not to be. Across the field the Gauls are forming. He has never seen so many. That is the first wrong thing. The line goes on past where a line should stop. And they are tall. Even at this distance he can see it. The height of them. The white of the limed hair standing up off their heads like a field of strange wheat. They are not quiet. The horns start, the long harsh note, then the cry under it rising along the whole length of them. That sound that is not words. He has been told it is only noise. It does not feel like only noise. It feels like the ground has a voice and the voice does not like him. Hold the line. That is the whole of it. That is the only thing a man in the line has to do. Hold, and trust the man beside you to hold. Trust the man beside him, all the way down, until the enemy throws itself on the wall of you. And the wall does not move, and the enemy learns its mistake. The Roman commanders had stretched the line thin to match the Gaulish width. They had put the weaker men, the half-trained, on the high ground to the right. They hoped the slope would do the work the men could not. It was not a stupid plan. It was the plan of men who still believed the old rules applied. Brennus saw the weak right at once. Of course he did. He was not a savage. That was the second wrong thing, the thing no one had told the man in the line. The giant with the limed hair could read a battlefield as well as any Roman. He had read this one, and he sent his strength not at the Roman center but at the thin, frightened wing on the hill. The horns change their note. They come. The first thing is the ground. It comes up through the feet before anything reaches the eyes. A drumming. Many feet all at once, building. The man in the line feels it in the soles of his boots, then in his knees, then in his teeth. He has felt it before. It is never not terrible. Then the smell. Closer now. Sweat and grease and the lime wash they put in their hair. Under it something animal. The smell of men who do not wash before a fight because the dirt is part of the boast. Then they are there. Now it is close. Closer than a man wants to think about afterward. A shield is a wall and the wall is 1 inch from another wall. He cannot see the field anymore. He can see a face. One face, over the rim of his shield, close enough to count the scars on it. The world has shrunk to the width of 2 arms. His and the other man's. There is no battle. There is only this. The shield takes the first blow and the blow is enormous. Not a cut, a weight, the whole running mass of a big man behind a long blade. The man in the line takes it on the boss and his arm screams. His feet slide back in the wet grass 1 inch, 2 inches. The man behind him puts a hand on his back and shoves him forward into it again. That is what the second rank is for. To be the thing that does not let you fall back. To be the wall behind the wall. He cannot swing. There is no room to swing. This is the thing the songs get wrong. In the press of it, a long sword is almost useless. The short Roman blade is the only thing that works. Low under the shield, into the soft place above the hip where a man keeps no armor. He does not aim. He cannot see to aim. He puts the point where the body has to be and pushes. He feels it go in. He feels the man on the other end of it stop being a thing that pushes. Then the weight is gone and a new weight takes its place. There is always a new weight. The line behind the first man feeds the next one forward the way his own line feeds him. 2 walls grinding. Each one pushing dead men down between its feet and putting live ones at the front. This is the part that lasts. Not the charge. The push. Shoulder to the shield. Feet finding purchase in ground that is no longer grass. Breathing the breath of the man trying to kill you. For a time that has no length. Where the only question is which wall slides backward first. The man in the line braces. But the blow does not land where he is. It lands up the slope on the right where the weak men are. He feels it the way you feel a wave hit the far end of a boat. A shudder that runs down the whole line toward him. He cannot see what is happening up there. He can only hear it change. The Roman shouts up the hill go high and then they go wrong. There is a sound men make when a line is holding, and a different sound they make when it is not. He has heard both. The second sound is the one coming down the slope now. The right is breaking. From above, the whole shape is plain and quick and terrible. The Gauls have hit the Roman right and folded it like wet cloth. The men on the hill are not dying in a line. The weak ones, the ones put there to be safe, they are running. And running men do not run into the enemy. They run away from it, into their own center, into the backs of the men still trying to hold. The Roman army is not being killed from the front. It is being crushed from its own collapsing flank. A whole wing of panic driving sideways into the body of itself. And behind all of it, bright and close, the river. The river was supposed to guard one side. Now it is the wall at their backs. They cannot get through it. His own line comes apart not because the enemy reached it but because his own people did. The friend on his right is shoved into him by someone behind. And that someone by someone behind him. The whole tight thing that was an army is now a crowd. And a crowd in armor by a river is not a fighting thing. It is a drowning thing waiting to happen. He does not decide to run. That is the part no one tells you. There is no moment where he chooses. The crowd simply moves and he is the crowd. His feet are carried. The shield, the heavy good shield, becomes the thing that will kill him if he keeps it. He does not remember dropping it. But it is gone. Everyone is going one way, toward the water, because the road home is cut. The only open ground is the river. And the river does not care that a man in armor cannot swim. The man beside him reaches the bank first. He sees it happen. The man goes in still wearing his mail. The water is brown and slow and it takes him to the waist. And then he is not walking anymore. He is being held. The weight of the iron pulling down while the current pushes sideways. He gets one hand up. He is not shouting. There is no breath left for shouting. He just reaches the way a man reaches for a thing he already knows he will not get. And the brown water comes up over the reaching hand. And then there is no hand. The river closes the way water closes, without a mark. The man on the bank watches the place where the hand was. For 1 second. He does not have more than 1 second. Behind him the slope is full of Gauls now, coming down into the soft killing. A man who stops on the bank to watch a friend drown will be the next thing on the ground. So he goes into the water too. There is nowhere else to go. The Gauls do not have to fight them now. They only have to follow. You do not fight a routed army. You harvest it. The killing on the bank is not a battle. It is the thing that comes after a battle. The long ugly part. Men cut down from behind with no shield and no friend and no line. Men in the water going under from the weight of the iron they trusted. The brown stream of the Allia turning the color a stream turns when enough is poured into it. Some get across. Not many and not toward Rome. They swim the wrong way, toward the wreck of Veii, the empty enemy city, because it has walls. And Rome's terror in that moment is greater than its sense. The men who could have defended Rome are running away from it, toward the corpse of the city they took, because the body still has walls. And home, in their broken minds, does not feel safe anymore. And the road to Rome lies open. That is the whole disaster in the end. Not how many died, though many did. The thing that mattered was the road. Between the Gauls and the city there was now nothing. No army. No second line. No Camillus. 11 miles of empty road and a city that did not yet know its only army was in the river. The field by the Allia goes quiet the way these fields go quiet. The horns have stopped. The crying has stopped. There is the river, louder now that nothing else is loud. There is the slow business of the victors among the fallen, which is its own kind of silence. And there is the sun going down on a summer evening, on a date Rome will never forgive. It lights the road south, the open road, all the way to the unguarded gates. The Gauls did not even march at once. That is the strangest mercy and the strangest cruelty. They had won so completely they could not believe it. They stopped to be sure, to count, to wonder if it was a trick. A whole day, maybe more. Rome learned what had happened. It had time to do the only thing left to do. Not defend. There was nothing to defend with. Choose what to save. 6. The old men in their chairs. The city had a day to decide who would live. That was the gift the Gauls gave it without meaning to. The day they spent counting their own victory was the day Rome spent doing arithmetic. Cold arithmetic. The kind a city does only once or twice in its life. When there is not enough of anything, and a choice has to be made about who gets it. There was no army. The army was in the river or behind the walls of dead Vi. There was no Camillus. The city. A handful of men still able to fight. Not enough food. Not enough time. So Rome made the hardest division a people can make. It decided what it was. A city is not its streets. It is not its houses or its shops or even its temples in the end. A city is the thing that lets it begin again. The young men who can fight. The priests who carry the gods and the rites. Without the rites, Rome stops being Rome. It becomes only people. The Vestal fire that cannot go out. The records. The future. Everything that could be carried up was carried up. Onto the Capitoline, the high rock at the city's heart. The one place a few could hold against the many. The young, the strong, the sacred, the seed of the next Rome. They went up. And the rest of the city was told, in not so many words, that it was on its own. Most of the rest ran. There is no shame in it, and the histories do not give it any. Ordinary people. Women and children and men too old to hold a wall but young enough to walk. They streamed out of the gates the Gauls had not yet reached. Into the countryside, toward other towns, toward anywhere. A whole people on the roads with what they could carry. The priests of one cult carried their sacred things out on foot. A man named Albinius was fleeing in a cart with his own family. He saw them walking. He put his family down in the road and gave the cart to the gods. The histories kept his name. They kept very few names from that day. They kept his because it was the kind of thing the day needed and almost did not get. But some did not run and did not go up the rock either. The oldest men of Rome stayed. Not the weak old. The great old. The men who had held the highest offices the city had to give. Men who had been consul, who had triumphed, who had led armies. Men who had judged disputes and watched Rome grow under their hands for 60, 70 years. Men whose names were the city's memory of itself. They were too old to fight on the rock. They would not take food the young defenders needed. And they would not run. Running was for people who had a future to run toward. These men had already had their lives. What they had left was the manner of leaving them. So they chose the manner. Each of them went home. Each put on the finest thing he owned. The robe of his highest office. The triumphal dress some of them had not worn in decades. The clothes a Roman wore on the greatest day of his life. They had their households set an ivory chair in the open doorway or the front court of the house. The curule chair, the seat of a Roman magistrate. And they sat down in it. In the empty city. In their best clothes. In the chair that meant they had once ruled. And they waited. They did not hide. That was the whole of it. They had decided something. If Rome was going to die, the oldest of Rome would meet it sitting up. Dressed for it. In the seat of the office they had held. The way a man meets a thing he has decided not to fear. Nothing was left to do with their lives but to spend the end of them as a statement. Here is how a Roman of the old kind dies. Looking at it. Not running from it. In the chair. The Gauls came in the next morning. They came in through gates no one closed. That was the first strange thing for them. Gauls knew how to take a city, and a taken city fights, screams, dies hard in its doorways. This city did none of that. The streets were empty. The houses were open. The shops stood with their goods still in them. A whole great city, silent, in the morning light, as if everyone had simply stepped out. The Gauls came down the empty streets warily, the way you walk into something too easy, waiting for the trick. And then they found the old men. The houses on the better streets had their doors open. And inside each open door, in the front of the house, an old man sat in an ivory chair, dressed like a king, not moving, not speaking, looking straight ahead or straight at them with no fear and no welcome and no sound at all. The Gauls stopped. They did not understand it. How could they? They were looking at something they had no name for. Big fierce men with limed hair and bloody swords stopped in the street, staring at silent old men in fine robes who would not look away. Some of the Gauls, the histories say, thought they were not men at all, thought they were statues, thought they had walked into some hall of the city's gods, images of the great dead set up to be honored, too still and too grand to be alive. For a moment the conqueror and the conquered looked at each other and neither one moved. Could not last. These things never can. One Gaul, made bold or made curious, walked up to one of the seated men. An old man named Marcus Papirius. Long white beard, the way old Romans wore them. The Gaul reached out his hand, maybe to see if the figure was stone, maybe just to touch the strange long beard, the way a man touches a thing he has never seen. He put his hand on the old man's beard and stroked it, and the old man lifted the ivory staff in his hand and struck the Gaul across the head. That was all it took. The spell broke. The stillness broke. The Gaul did the thing a struck man does. And then it was not a hall of statues anymore. It was a city of old men and the men who had come to kill them. And the killing started. They died in their chairs. The histories say it in one line and then move on, and there is wisdom in moving on. The greatest of Rome, the consuls and the triumphators, the living memory of the city, killed in the doorways of their own houses, in the clothes of their highest honor. They had chosen the chair. The chair is where they were found. After that there was no reason for the Gauls to be careful, and no city left to be careful of. They burned it. From the Capitoline, from the rock where the last of Rome stood crowded and starving, they watched it go. Rome had stood for 360 years. Romulus had cut the first furrow with a plow. Numa had built the temples and shut the gates of war. Kings had ruled it and been thrown out of it. The Republic had been born in it and bled for it. From the high rock, the people who carried all of that in their memory watched it catch fire at once. The roofs went first the way roofs do, then whole streets. The smoke climbed in columns and then in one column. A single black thing standing over the city, leaning in the wind. The temples burned. The houses burned. The shops with the goods still in them burned. 3.5 centuries of a city. The wood and the cloth and the records and the small dear things of 100,000 lives. All of it going up into the summer sky. In a heat the people on the rock could feel on their faces from a quarter mile away. They did not look away. Where would they look? It was their whole world on fire and they had nothing to do but watch it and keep the rock. The fire burned for a long time. Fires in cities do. By the time it was done, there was not much left below the rock. Black timbers and standing stone. And the strange clean look a place has after everything that could burn has burned. The Gauls camped in the ash. The Romans held the rock above them. Two peoples, one in the ruin and one over it, neither able to reach the other, both settling in for the long part that comes after the loud part is over. A siege now. The thing this whole episode began with 10 years ago and 10 miles north at VI. Rome had spent a decade besieging another city. Now it was the city under siege. On its own rock, in the smoke of its own burning. And the lesson was not lost on anyone who had the stomach to think it. The first night on the Capitoline, the fire had burned down to a low red glow across the ruined city. The people on the rock were quiet. There was nothing to say. Below them, in the dark, their city was a field of dull coals. The Gauls' fires were bright points scattered through it. Men cooking in the wreck of other men's homes. The smell of it came up the rock. Burned wood and the other smells a burned city has. The Vestal fire had been carried up and kept. It was the one clean flame on the whole hill, small and orange and tended. The city's life reduced to one fire on a rock. A few exhausted people had sworn it would not go out. They kept it lit. That was the whole of what was left to do. Hold the rock. Keep the one fire. Wait for something, though no one could have said what. Camillus was in Ardea, a man Rome had thrown away. No one on the rock was thinking of him yet. They were only thinking of the fire, and the dark, and the long odds and the geese. The geese matter. We will get to the geese. For now there is only the rock and the ash below it. And a city learning the thing it had refused to learn from the white horses and the broken truce. That largeness is not safety. That the gods, when you ask them to teach you a lesson, do not always pick the gentle one. 7. The geese on the hill. A siege is a contest of stomachs. That is the truth under all the rest of it. Once the walls hold and the storm fails, a siege stops being about courage and becomes about food. Who has more? Who can stand the lack of it longer? The Capitoline was a strong rock and the Romans held it well. None of that mattered against the slow arithmetic of an empty stomach. They had carried up what they could. It was not enough. It is never enough. You cannot carry a year of bread up a rock in a single afternoon of panic. The Gauls were starving too. The city they had burned could not feed them. The countryside had emptied ahead of them, the farms stripped or abandoned, and a sickness had begun to move through their camp. The kind that breeds in ruins where too many died and no one was left to bury them. Both peoples were being ground down by the same two enemies, hunger and time. The only question was which would break first. So the Gauls looked harder at the rock. A frontal assault up the Capitoline had already failed. The slope was steep and the Romans above could throw down anything they had at men climbing with their hands. Brennus was not going to spend his warriors that way again. He did what a patient besieger does. He sent men around the rock at night, quietly, to study it, to find the place no one was watching. They found it. There was a path. Not a path even. A line up the cliff where the rock gave a man enough to hold. If the man was strong and unafraid of height, and willing to climb in the dark with a sword on his back. It was the steepest face of the whole hill. And because it was the steepest, it was the least guarded. The Romans had reasoned the way the Gauls hoped they would reason. No one would come up there. Cannot be climbed. So they put their few exhausted sentries elsewhere, on the gentler slopes, where an enemy with sense would try. The Gauls did not have sense. They had hunger, a man who had found a way up, the patience to do it in the dark. He goes up first because he found it, or because he is the best, or because no one else will. It does not matter which. He is alone on the cliff in the dark with the rock cold under his fingers. He has done the thing that makes a climber's stomach drop. He has looked down once. Below him is black and the small red glow of the dead city. Above him is the rim of the rock and, beyond it, the last of Rome, asleep. He climbs the way you climb a thing in the dark. By feel. Hand finds a hold. Test it. Trust it. Pull. Foot finds the next. The breath has to be quiet and the body wants to breathe loud. Every small stone that comes loose under his hand is a sound that could end him. He freezes when it falls, listening until the silence comes back. It always comes back. The sentries are not here. He knew they would not be here. That was the whole plan, that no one watches the place that cannot be climbed. Behind him, below, the others wait their turn. A chain of them on the cliff face. Each man's hands a body length above the next man's head. All of them climbing toward the sleeping rim. All of them quiet. All of them good at this. He is almost up. From above, the whole hill is asleep. The Romans on the rock are a scatter of exhausted bodies wrapped against the night. The few sentries nod at the wrong slopes. The dogs that should have warned them are gone quiet, too hungry to bark, lying still wherever they fell. The Vestal fire is a small orange point near the temples. And up the black cliff on the unwatched side, a line of pale climbing shapes is coming. Almost to the top now. The hands reach from the rim, and not one living thing on the whole sleeping rock knows they are there. Above all of it, the summer stars turn, indifferent, the way they turned over Vi and the Allia, and every other night men decided would matter. The rock is about to fall in its sleep. Nothing on it knows, except the geese. There were geese on the Capitoline, sacred ones. They belonged to Juno, kept at her temple, fed and tended even now, even starving, because they were the goddesses. And you did not eat the goddesses' birds, however empty your belly was. It was the kind of stubborn piety that looks like foolishness right up until the moment it saves everything. The men on the rock were hungry enough to eat anything. They had not eaten the geese. The geese were Juno's, and geese do not sleep the way men sleep. The first climber's hand came over the rim. Maybe his weight shifted a stone. Maybe the geese simply heard a thing that was not the night. It does not matter. They came awake all at once, the way geese do, and they did the thing geese do, which is the loudest, ugliest, most relentless alarm a frightened bird can make. The whole flock of them, screaming into the dark, beating their wings. A wall of noise erupting out of the silence. On the one corner of the rock where the enemy was, one man heard it first. His name was Marcus Manlius. Remember the name. The season is not done with it. What it does next is one of the cruelest turns in the whole story. For tonight he is only a soldier who was sleeping near the temple of Juno. A man who came awake to the geese. A man who understood, faster than a tired man should, what screaming birds on the cliff meant. He did not wait for the rest. There was no time to wake the rest. He grabbed his shield and his sword and he ran for the rim, alone, toward the noise. The first Gaul is over the rim on his feet, drawing his blade. Manlius hits him before he is set. He does not cut him. He drives him with the shield, the whole weight of his body behind it. The way you shove a door that something is pushing on from the other side. The Gaul goes back. There is nothing behind him but the cliff he just climbed. He goes off the edge. And he does not go alone. He falls into the men below him, the chain of climbers a body length apart. And a falling armed man on a near vertical face is a thing that cannot be dodged. He takes the next one. The two of them take the next. The cliff that let them up one careful hand at a time sends them down all at once. A tangle of bodies and iron peeling off the rock into the black. And the small terrible sounds of it come up out of the dark a moment later. By then Manlius is not alone. The geese are still screaming and now the men are awake too, pouring toward the rim. What could have been a slaughter of sleeping Romans becomes a short, hard fight. A fight at the top of a cliff that the Gauls cannot win. They are coming up one at a time into men who are ready now. With the high ground and the rim and their backs to their own fire. The few who reach the top do not stay at the top. The rock holds. The night attack is over almost as fast as it began. The field, such as it is, goes quiet. The geese settle slowly the way they do, a last few complaints into the dark and then nothing. The men stand at the rim breathing hard, looking down at a cliff with nothing on it now. They listened to a silence that a moment ago was about to be the end of Rome. Manlius stands among them. He has just done the thing the whole night will be remembered for. He pushed the first man off the rock and the rock was saved. In the morning they reckoned what had happened. The reckoning had two halves. Rome dealt with both. There was a man to reward and a man to punish. There was the sentry whose slope it should have been. The one who had slept through the climb. He was thrown from the rock he had failed to watch. Off the same cliff the Gauls had climbed. By his own people. Rome did not soften that. A man given the night watch and found asleep on the night the city nearly died does not get mercy. He gets the cliff. And Manlius they loved. They gave him the only thing they had. On a starving rock it was almost nothing. It meant everything. Each man brought him a little of his own ration. Half a handful of meal, a mouthful of wine. Carried to him by hand. The city's whole gratitude measured out in the one currency a siege has. It was not much. It was everything they had. He took it the way you take a thing like that. And they gave him a name. He was Marcus Manlius Capitolinus now. Manlius of the capital. The man who saved the rock. He would carry that name the rest of his life. He would be more famous for it than for anything else he ever did. That is the thing to hold, going forward, the small cold thing under the triumph of the night. Hold the name, Capitolinus, the man who saved the hill. Because Rome remembers what it owes a man right up until the day it decides he has become a danger. And the rock that made his name is the rock it will throw him off. But that is years away. Tonight he is only the man the geese woke. The man who pushed the first one off the edge. Tonight the rock holds. And the strangest thing in the whole strange night is the thing that did the holding. Not the wall. Not the watch. Not the great Manlius even in the end. A flock of birds too sacred to eat. Kept alive by men too pious to be sensible. Awake when every man and dog was asleep. The thing that saved Rome was the thing Rome had refused to use. The geese were spared because they were the goddesses. And because they were spared, they were there. And because they were there, they screamed. A city learns odd lessons in a year like this one. That largeness is not safety. That the law you break to a Gaul comes back with horns. And that the smallest, most useless, most stubbornly protected thing on the whole rock can turn out to matter most. It can be the one thing standing between you and the dark. 8. The weight of gold. In the end, neither side could win the rock. The Romans could not be driven off it. The night of the geese had proved that. But they could not come down off it either. There was no army to come down to. No city below but ash. No Italy that had risen to save them. They held the rock and the rock held nothing. They were winning a siege that ended in starvation either way. The Gauls could not take the rock. They had tried the slope and failed. They had tried the cliff and the geese had cost them that. And the siege was eating them as fast as it ate the men above. The sickness in the camp got worse. They were soldiers far from home. Sitting in the ruin of a place they had already taken everything from. Dying of fever in the streets of a city that had nothing left to give them. They had won the war. They were losing the peace day by day to disease and time. Both sides had run out of ways to want what they wanted. The Gauls wanted to go home rich. The Romans wanted them gone. And the strange thing, the thing that made what came next possible, was simple. Those two wants did not actually conflict. The Gauls did not need Rome. They needed gold and a road north. Rome did not need to defeat them. It needed them to leave. There was a deal in there, ugly and obvious, waiting for both sides to be hungry enough to make it. They got there. They always get there when the choice is a deal or the grave. The terms were not complicated. The Gauls would lift the siege and march away. Rome would pay them to do it. The price was 1,000 pounds of gold. It is a great deal of gold for a city that had just watched itself burn. They scraped it together. The temples gave up what the fire had left. The women of Rome gave up their own gold, the histories say, and were honored for it afterward. The small jewelry of 1,000 households melted into the price of survival. Rome counted out 1,000 pounds of gold to make the giants go away. And they brought it to the scales. Now slow down. This is the scene the whole episode is named for. And it turns on a thing as small and as old as a set of weights. You weigh gold against bronze. That is how it is done. You put the agreed weight of bronze on one pan, 1,000 pounds of it. Then you pour gold onto the other pan until the two balance. When the beam hangs level, the gold equals the weight, and the deal is done. The whole thing depends on the weights being honest. The bronze on the one side has to actually be what it claims to be. 1,000 pounds, no more. It is the most basic kind of trust there is, the trust that a weight is a weight. The Gauls brought their own weights. The Romans poured the gold. They watched the beam, and the beam would not come level. They poured more. Still it would not balance. They had brought 1,000 pounds, the agreed sum exactly counted, and the scale said it was not enough. The Gaulish weights were heavy, false, made to read more than they were, so that Rome would have to pour out more gold than the deal had ever named. A Roman officer at the scale objected. Of course he did. It was cheating, plain and open, in front of everyone. And a Roman did not stand quiet while he was robbed at a scale he had been promised was fair. And here is the moment. Brennus is standing at the scale. He hears the Roman complain about the weights. He does not argue. He does not explain. He reaches to his own waist, and he unbuckles his sword, the heavy iron blade in its belt and scabbard, the thing that took the city, and he throws it onto the pan, onto the bronze side, the side that was already too heavy. The beam drops further. The Romans must now pour out even more gold, to match a weight that includes a Gaulish sword thrown on top of false weights. And he says the two words, Vi victis, woe to the conquered. That is all. 2 words. He does not raise his voice. He does not need to. The sword is on the scale and the beam has dropped. The meaning is in the iron, not the words. The words only name what the iron already said. There is a moment, after the sword lands, where no one in the forum moves. The Romans at the scale, the officers, the men who had counted out the gold of their burned city and the jewelry of their wives. They stand and look at the blade lying on the bronze. It is a dull thing. A working sword notched, the leather of the grip dark with use. It is not even a fine sword. That is somehow the worst of it. It is an ordinary tool, thrown on a scale by a man who has decided the rules do not apply to him. Nothing the losers can do will make them apply. The scale does not lie. The scale only weighs. And it is telling them in iron and bronze exactly what they are now. Vi victis is not an insult. That is the thing to understand. An insult is personal, and Brennus did not care enough about these particular Romans to insult them. It is a statement of fact, the coldest one there is. To the conquered, woe. Meaning, you do not get to argue about the weights. You do not get to point out the cheating. You do not get to appeal to the deal, to fairness, to the rules. Those things belong to people who can enforce them, and you cannot enforce anything because you lost. The weights are heavy because the strong man made them heavy. The sword is on the scale because the strong man put it there. And there is no court above the strong man to take your complaint to. That is what it means to be conquered. Not that you pay. That you pay whatever they say, and you have no standing to object. The only thing that ever gave your objection weight was the army that is in the river now. Everything Rome believed about itself led to this scale. The law on the bronze tables, the gods in their temples, the careful piety, the pride in being Rome. All of it. And here it means nothing. A man with a sword and false weights has decided it means nothing. And there is no one left to make him decide otherwise. The most lawful people in Italy standing at a scale, learning that law is a thing the strong allow the weak to have, that justice is downstream of the army, that a weight is only honest as long as someone strong enough to insist on it is standing there. Rome had been the one standing there at 100 scales in 100 towns it had beaten. Vi had learned this lesson from Rome. Now Rome learned it from Brennus at a scale with a sword on it and the two cold words. It is the thing the white horses could not see and the broken truce could not see. Largeness is not safety. There is always a bigger weight, somewhere waiting to be thrown on the scale. And on the day it is thrown, all your law and all your gods come to exactly this. A complaint no one is required to hear. The Romans were going to pay it. There was nothing else to do. The gold was being weighed against a Gaulish sword and false bronze. And they were reaching for more gold to make the beam come level. The alternative to paying a cheated price was no city at all. The hand was already moving toward more gold. And that is when the other thing happened. The thing that turns V Victus from the end of the story into the middle of it. A different man came into the forum, with an army behind him, and he had a different answer for what Rome buys her freedom with. Not gold. But that is the next chapter, and it deserves its own. For now, freeze it here. The scale tilted wrong. The sword on the bronze. 1,000 pounds of a burned city's gold not being enough on purpose. And two words hanging in the smoke over the forum. Words the Romans would carry for the rest of their history. Words they would say in time to 100 other peoples at 100 other scales. Woe to the conquered. They learned it from the man who beat them. They never forgot it. And the not forgetting is most of what Rome became. 9. Iron, not gold. The hand was reaching for more gold. That is where we left it. The scale tilted wrong. The sword on the bronze. The two cold words still in the air. A Roman officer counting out more of his burned city's gold to satisfy a weight that was a lie. There was nothing else to do. The man with the army makes the rules. And the man with the army was Brennus. And Brennus had thrown his sword on the scale. And then there was another man with another army. One thing has to be said plainly here. What happens next is the most satisfying moment in the whole story. And the most satisfying moments are the ones a people most wants to improve in the retelling. The way Rome chose to remember it is this. At the worst second of the whole disaster, while the gold was being weighed, Camillus arrived. The exile. The man Rome had thrown away over 4 white horses and 1/10 of plunder. He had not been idle in Ardea. He had gathered the Romans who had fled there, and the scattered survivors of the Allia. And he had drilled them back into something like an army. And Rome, even in its ruin, had remembered him. The Senate on the Rock had named him dictator a second time, in his absence. The only legal authority left in a broken city. Reaching out to the one man who had ever beaten the unbeatable. So when he came not as a renegade with a private army. He came as the lawful dictator of Rome. Coming home to a city that had finally, desperately, begged him back. It is a perfect story. The wronged hero vindicated at the last possible second. Arriving the very moment all is lost. His exile turned to glory by the city's need. It is so perfect that hold it at arm's length and look at it. Did he arrive at that precise second, sword in hand, as the gold was on the scale? Almost certainly not the way the story tells it. The timing is too good. Real armies do not crest the hill on the perfect beat. The story is too neat to be only true. What is more likely is messier and slower. A relief that took days. A campaign rather than a single dramatic entrance. The dictatorship and the gathering of forces happening over weeks while the siege ground on. Rome compressed it. Rome took a long, ugly, grinding deliverance and remembered it as a single golden moment. A people that has been to the bottom needs the climb back to have a shape it can hold. The white horses had a shape. V Victus had a shape. The city gave its rescue a shape to match. So tell it both ways. The way it happened, slow and hard and over time. And the way Rome needed it to have happened, which is the way that lasted. The way Rome needed it to have happened goes like this. Camillus comes into the forum with armed men behind him. He sees the scale. He sees the gold. He sees the Gaulish sword on the bronze, and he hears, from the men there, what the two words were. And he does the thing a dictator can do that a beaten official at a scale cannot. He orders the gold taken back. The histories give him a short fragment. It is the answer to V Victus. Rome buys her freedom back with iron. Not gold. That is the turn. That is the whole season turning over on a single sentence. Brennus had said, to the conquered, woe, you pay what we say. Camillus says, in effect, that we are not the conquered anymore. And the thing we pay with is not gold on a scale but iron in the hand. The argument about the weights is over. There is nothing left to weigh. The scale was a thing for people who had agreed to settle by gold, and Rome has stopped agreeing. Brennus, of course, protests. There was a treaty. The gold was promised. And Camillus says the treaty does not count, because the man who made it had no authority to make it. He himself is dictator now. The deal was struck by lesser men in his absence. Without the only power that could bind Rome. The deal is nothing. It is a lawyer's answer and an honest one at the same time, which is the rarest kind. Rome had broken a sacred truce to a Gaul once already. In the matter of the Fabii, paid for it in fire. Now Camillus voids a treaty too. But he does it as the lawful head of the state, not as a reckless ambassador. And Rome will tell itself the difference matters. Whether it does is a question the season leaves open. Then the iron. The fight does not happen as a battle on a clear field. It happens in the wreck of the city. That is the thing the legend tends to leave out and the thing that matters most. The Gauls had been sitting in burned streets for months, sick, scattered through the ruins. Fat and slow with a long, easy occupation of a place that could not fight back. An army that has been a garrison forgets how to be an army. Camillus's men were hungry and angry and had spent weeks remembering how to hold a line. The first clash is in the streets. A Roman comes around a wall of black timber into a Gaul who was not expecting him. Neither has room. This is not the open field where the Gauls are terrible. This is close work, wall to wall. The long Gaulish sword has no room to swing. The short Roman blade has all the room it needs. The Roman takes him low and moves past, into the next one. The way you move through a thing you have drilled 1,000 times. A thing you are finally allowed to do. The Gaul he took low does not fall clean. He goes down against the timber wall, one hand pressed to the wound. The last thing he sees is the back of the Roman already gone past him. Already at the next one. The next one is bigger. He gets his blade up. But the street is too narrow for the swing and the wall catches the edge of it. And in the half-second the blade is stuck, the Roman is inside his reach. There is no skill in what happens then. There is only who is closer. And the Roman is closer. The big man folds over the short blade and slides down the wall beside the first. A third comes out of a doorway behind the Roman. He has the back of a man who does not know he is there. He raises the long sword in both hands. A second Roman comes up the street a pace behind the first. He takes the Gaul through the side before the blade comes down. The two of them do not speak. They have done this in drill 100 times. One man goes forward and the man behind him watches the doors. That is the whole of it. That is why a line of tired farmers beats a street full of giants. Not strength. The habit of covering the man in front of you. From above, the burned city is a maze, and in the maze 2 armies are tangled. The Gauls are not in a line. They cannot get into a line. They are pockets of startled men in streets they thought were safe. And the Romans are coming through the wreck in tight small groups. The way the city's own broken shape forces them to, clearing it room by room and street by street. There is no grand charge. There is no field of banners. There is a burned city being taken back the way it was lost, piece by piece in the smoke, by men who know the streets because the streets were theirs. And above it the same indifferent sky that watched the Allia and the cliff watching this too, keeping no score. It is the close work that beats them. The Gauls were never beaten in the open in this war. They are beaten here in the alleys in the ruin, where size and reach mean nothing, where the only thing that matters is the man in front of you and how fast your blade is. The Romans are faster. They are angrier. And they are home. Even in the ash, even with everything burned, they are standing in their own streets. There is a strength in that the Gauls cannot match. The Gauls are a long way from anywhere they could call that. The Gauls break, not all at once, the way an occupation breaks, in pieces, some fighting hard and dying, some pulling back, some simply leaving, the whole loose mass of them peeling out of the city they could not hold, and onto the roads north. And then, the histories say, Camillus does not let them simply go. He follows. He catches the column on the road, away from the walls. And he finishes the thing in the open after all. On ground he chose, when they were already broken and moving, and no longer the army that won the Allia. It is not a fair fight, and it is not meant to be. V Victus cuts both ways. The conquered get no mercy. Now the Gauls are the ones being conquered. On a road. By a man making sure the lesson goes home. In the only language the scale taught him. The field goes quiet. Months before, a proud man had walked out the gate of Rome and stopped. He prayed or cursed that the city would be made to miss him. Quickly. That it would feel the wanting and know what it had thrown away. It had. Every part of the prayer was answered. In full. In the most terrible way a prayer can be answered. Rome had missed him. Rome had felt the wanting. Rome had learned what it threw away when it threw him away. In fire. In 2 cold words at a scale. He got the vindication he asked the gods for. He got it on top of the burning of his city. That is the thing about asking the gods for vindication. They do not separate it from the cost. They give you the whole answer, the wanting and the ruin both. You decide afterward whether it was worth the asking. The histories gave him a title for it. Conditor Alter, the second founder. Romulus had founded the city out of nothing. Camillus had founded it again out of ash. Some thought that the harder thing. The second time, the city knew exactly what it could lose. There is a thing worth seeing here if you have been holding the white horses. He had ridden into Rome once on 4 white horses, above the people. A man who could not feel his own pride. And it had cost him everything. He came back into Rome the second time on foot, in the ash at the head of hungry men. And he took the city back with iron in the alleys. The first time he reached for the chariot of a god and lost the city. The second time he reached for a short sword in a burned street and saved it. The same man. The pride burned out of him, or buried under enough loss that it stopped showing. Rome got back not the man who rode the gods' horses. It got the man who would fight on foot in the wreckage. It took the fire to make the trade. The gold went back into Rome's treasury, what was left of it. The scale was put away. The sword Brennus threw is not in any museum. It went north on the road with the men who survived, or it did not. And it does not matter. The thing it weighed was never gold. What it weighed was the answer to a question. What does Rome buy her freedom with? For one terrible season the answer was gold, on a scale against a liar's weights. Then a man came back from exile and gave the other answer, the one Rome kept. Iron. The field goes quiet. 10. The Centurion's order. The Gauls were gone. The hard part was just starting. That is the thing no one warns you about a disaster. The fear is the easy part. The fear has a clear job. Survive. Hold the rock. Keep the fire. When the enemy is at the gate, a man knows exactly what to do. Even if what he has to do is sit in a chair and wait to die. It is afterward that the trouble comes. When the enemy is gone and the smoke clears and you are standing in the wreck of everything. And the question is no longer how to survive but whether it is even worth rebuilding. Rome stood in its own ashes and asked that question out loud. Look at what they were standing in. 3.5 centuries of a city burned. Not damaged. Burned. The houses were gone. The shops were gone. The records of who owned what, who owed what, who had married whom and who had been born when. All of it had been kept on wood and wax. Most of it was ash now. A man could stand in front of the black footprint of his own house and not be sure in law that it was still his. The temples were broken. The whole physical body of the city, the thing you could touch, was a field of charcoal and standing stone. And 10 miles north there was a city that was not burned. This is the trap the chapter turns on, and it is a good one because it is so reasonable. Rome had taken Vi whole. It had not burned it. The houses still stood. The walls still stood, better walls than Rome had ever had, walls that had held Rome off for 10 years. There was a complete, intact, defensible city sitting empty 10 miles up the road, and Rome owned it. Why rebuild a pile of ash from nothing, the argument went, when you could simply walk into a finished city that was already yours? It was not a stupid argument. It was the sensible argument. That is what made it dangerous. A great part of the common people wanted to go. Of course they did. They were the ones with the least to rebuild and the most to gain from walking into finished houses. To them Rome was not a sacred place. It was a place they had been poor in. And now a place they would be poor in and homeless too. Vi had roofs. A roof is not an abstraction when you have spent a season on a rock-eating siege rations. The move made plain physical sense to the people who had the least. The Senate and Camillus wanted to stay. And here you have to be careful. The reasons they gave were all about the gods. The reasons underneath were not only about the gods. This was the spot, they said, that the gods had marked out. The auguries had been taken here. The sacred fire belonged here. To abandon it was to abandon the city's whole relationship with heaven. To walk away from the very things that had, in the end, saved them. The geese were Juno's. Juno was here. You do not move a city away from the goddess who just saved it. That was the argument they made in public. It was sincere as far as it went. But there was a harder thing under it that the next chapter, and the season's last note, will name. For now, hold the public version. The gods chose this place. We do not get to unchoose it. Camillus made the speech. The histories give him a long one. A reconstructed ancient speech is the most counterfeit thing a script can make. The substance is what matters. He stood in the ash and argued, with everything he had, that Rome must stay where Rome was. The gods, the graves, the whole history under their feet. He had just earned the right to be heard. The second founder, the man who took the city back. He spent that whole hard-won authority on this one thing. Stay. Build it again here. Do not become the people who survived the Gauls only to abandon Rome to the weeds. Do not move into a dead enemy's house. It was a great speech. It did not settle it. That is the honest part. The speech did not work, not by itself. The matter hung. The people were not persuaded by gods and graves when there were finished roofs 10 miles away. Came down to a vote and the vote was close. And close votes about whether a city should exist are a terrifying thing to leave hanging in the air. And then the thing happened that decided it. It is exactly the kind of thing Rome loved. It took the decision out of human hands and put it in the gods. While the Senate was sitting, still arguing, a body of soldiers was being marched across the forum. They were coming back from guard duty. An ordinary movement of ordinary men. And the centurion in charge of them, at the exact spot where they happened to be passing, gave an order. The ordinary order a centurion gives when a unit reaches the place it is to halt. He said to his standard-bearer, "Plant the standard. This is the best place for us to stay." That is all he meant. Set down the standard. We stop here. It was a command about a few dozen tired soldiers and a patch of the forum. He was not talking about the city. He had no idea anyone important was listening. But the senators heard it. And in the hush of an undecided vote, those words landed like an oracle. The room was full of men who had spent the whole crisis reading the will of heaven. In the flight of birds and the screaming of geese. Plant the standard. This is the best place to stay. The senators took it as a sign. Not a coincidence. A sign. The gods, they decided, had put those words in an ordinary soldier's mouth. At the exact moment Rome was deciding whether to abandon itself. Heaven had voted, through a centurion who did not know he was the messenger. Rome would stay. A city decided its own existence on the strength of a sentence. A sentence a man said about where to park his troops. You can read that two ways, and the season wants you to hold both. One way is that it is faith. Real faith. A people so attuned to the divine that it could hear the gods speak through anyone. Anywhere. Even a centurion. The other way is that it is what people do when a decision is too heavy. Too heavy to make on the merits. They look for a sign. And if you are looking hard enough for a sign, the world is full of them. A close vote, an unbearable choice. And then a stray sentence that lets everyone stop arguing and call the result the will of heaven. The sign did not make the decision. It let the decision be made without anyone having to own it. Rome stayed. That is the fact. Maybe the centurion was a messenger of Jupiter. Maybe he was just a tired man telling his standard-bearer where to stand. The result was the same. The city did not move to VI. It rebuilt itself on its own ashes, on the spot the gods had marked. Or the spot a soldier happened to halt on, depending on how you needed to remember it. And the rebuilding itself left a mark you can still read. They rebuilt in a hurry. There was no plan, no surveyor laying out a clean grid, no time for any of that. Every man wanted his own house back up before winter, on his own ground. And with the old records burned, no one could prove exactly where the old boundaries had run. So each man built where he thought his ground had been, as fast as he could. And the city went back up crooked. The streets did not follow the old careful lines, because no one remembered the old careful lines. They ran where the gaps between the new houses left them room to run. Narrow, bent, tangled. And it stayed that way, for centuries. Long after Rome ruled the world, visitors would remark on it. For the capital of an empire, the city itself was a maze. The streets cramped and wandering and senseless. Nothing like the clean grids Rome laid out in the new towns it founded. The reason was this season. The reason was a city rebuilt in a panic on burned ground. By men who could not remember where their own walls had stood. Rome conquered the world from a city it had thrown together too fast to straighten. The crookedness was the scar. You could walk the bent streets 1,000 years later and be walking the exact shape of one bad summer. That is the season's quiet joke, if it has one. Rome stayed on the sacred spot, chose by the gods, marked by an oracle in a soldier's mouth. And the holy chosen city was a crooked, hurried, half-remembered mess. The gods, if they chose it, did not bother to send a surveyor. The city stood again, bent, but standing, on its own ashes where it started. And the thing that had nearly destroyed it from outside was gone. But the thing that had always been eating it from inside had not gone anywhere. The old quarrel, the debt, the land, the patricians and the plebs. It had only been waiting for the fire to pass. It did not have to wait long. 11. The hero on the rock. A few years on, the fire was out. The city was back up, crooked and standing. The Gauls were a black memory and a date in the calendar no one would start a war on. Rome had survived the worst thing that had ever happened to it. And it went straight back to the thing it had been doing before the worst thing happened. It went back to the quarrel between those who had everything and those who had nothing. The fire did not fall evenly. Fires never do. A rich man whose house burned had other property. Land outside the walls, slaves, reserves. The deep cushion that wealth always is. He rebuilt and went on. A poor man whose house burned had the house. That was all. When it was ash, he had nothing, and to put a roof back over his family he had to borrow. And the only people with money to lend were the rich. The same rich who had ridden out the fire on their cushions. So the poor borrowed from the rich to rebuild the city. And the debt came roaring back worse than ever. The same debt the season had started with. The debt that drove the first plebeians out onto the hill generations back. Now the whole city was in hock to rebuild itself. And the law on debt was savage. A man who could not pay could be seized by the man he owed. Bound. Held. In the end sold, or worse. The same machinery that had put the old soldier's scars on display 2 episodes ago was grinding again. Harder. The fire had thrown so many into its teeth at once. Debt slavery in the rebuilt city on the sacred chosen ground, under the gods who had just saved everyone. Into this walks the hero, Marcus Manlius, Capitolinus, the man the geese woke. The man who pushed the first Gaul off the rock and saved the last of Rome. Remember him. The season told you to remember him, and here is why. He looked at the debt. He looked at the men being bound and sold. Men who had stood on the rock with him, some of them. Men who had held the city through the siege. And now they were being dragged off for owing money they only owed because the city burned. And something in him would not have it. So he did a thing almost no man of his class ever did. He took the side of the poor. He did it with his own money first. The histories tell a story, and whether it is exactly true or polished, it has a true shape. A centurion, a decorated soldier, a man who had fought for Rome, was being hauled off for debt. And Manlius paid it. Out of his own purse, in the open, he bought the man's freedom and let him go. Then he sold off a piece of his own estate and used the silver to free more of them. He stood up in public and said what no one of his rank was supposed to say out loud, that it was a disgrace, that the men who saved the city were being enslaved by it, that the rich were sitting on gold while the soldiers who held the rock were dragged away in chains. The poor loved him for it. Of course they did. Here was the greatest hero of the age. A patrician, a man who had every reason to stand with his own class. And he was standing with them instead, paying their debts, calling their masters thieves. They gathered around him, his house on the Capitoline filled with grateful men. He had the love of the crowd and the prestige of the Savior, and the willingness to spend both on the people at the bottom. And that is exactly when the men at the top decided he had to die. A popular hero who champions the poor against the rich is a dangerous thing. To the men who run a republic, the single most dangerous thing that can exist. Not an enemy army. An enemy army you can beat, and beating it makes you stronger. A beloved insider who turns the poor majority into his personal following is different. The republic has no defense against him. He is using the republic's own tools. The love of the people, the law, the vote, There is a word the Romans had for what such a man was reaching for, whether he knew it or not. The thing Rome feared above all others. The thing it had thrown out its kings to be rid of. The thing it had built its whole self around never having again. A king. That was the charge. Not theft. Not corruption. Manlius, they said, was aiming at kingship. Using the debt crisis to build a private power base. Buying the love of the mob. Setting himself up to seize the city the way the old kings had held it. It did not matter whether it was true. Probably was not true, not in the way they meant. What mattered was that it could be made to look true. Everything a generous popular hero does looks, from the right angle, like something else. Exactly like what a man building toward a throne would do. Free the debtors. Win the crowd. Stand against the Senate. The acts are the same. Only the intention differs, and intention is the one thing you cannot put on a scale. He did not think of himself as reaching for a crown. He thought of himself as the only honest man in a city of thieves. He had saved Rome once with his own hands, in the dark, when everyone else slept. He could not see why saving it again, from its own greed this time, should be a crime. The men accusing him were the men who had let the soldiers be sold. In his own mind he was the patriot and they were the traitors. And a patriot does not examine too closely. He does not ask whether the love of the crowd has started to feel good for its own sake. It is the oldest blindness there is. He had been right once, gloriously, against everyone. And a man who has been right against everyone once will believe he is right against everyone forever. That belief had a name in Rome, and the name was the charge, and he never once recognized himself in it. They put him on trial, and here the season folds back on itself, the way it has been folding all along. The fold is the cruelest yet. He defended himself the way a soldier defends himself. He pointed. He stood at the trial and he pointed up, at the Capitoline, the rock itself looming over the city. There, he said, that rock. I saved it. I pushed the first man off it with my own hands while you slept. He brought out the men he had saved in the war, 300 of them by one account, and the men whose debts he had paid. And they stood around him in the open. He showed his scars. He turned the trial into a living monument to the night the geese screamed. And it worked. As long as the rock was in sight, it worked. No jury in Rome could look up at the Capitoline, the thing this man had saved, and condemn him. The acquittal was certain. You cannot convict a man for treason in the shadow of the proof. The proof that he loved the city more than his own life. So they moved the trial. That is the detail to hold. They moved it. They adjourned, and reconvened the court somewhere the Capitoline could not be seen. A grove outside the walls, the histories say, out of sight of the rock. And there, he could not point at the thing he had saved. The jury looked at a man and not at a monument. There they convicted him. The sentence was death, and the manner of the death was the thing the whole chapter has been walking toward. They took him to the Tarpeian Rock, the cliff at the edge of the Capitoline, the execution place, where Rome threw the condemned, traitors and murderers, off the height to the stones below. It was the same rock, the same cliff he had defended, the same height up which the Gauls had climbed in the dark, the same edge over which he had shoved their first man to his death, and saved the city. They walked the savior of the Capitoline to the edge of the Capitoline, and they threw him off the rock he was famous for holding. The thing comments on itself. He had thrown a Gaul off that rock to save the city. The city threw him off the same rock to save itself from him. He could not have seen the symmetry. Men in the middle of their own story never can. He went off the edge he had guarded, down the height he had defended, to the stones at the bottom of the hill that owed him everything. They were not wrong to fear what he could become. That is the unbearable thing. The Senate's fear was real and the danger was real. A beloved hero building a following on the debts of the poor really could have ended the Republic. Rome had seen kings. It knew exactly what that road looked like. The men who killed Manlius were not simply villains protecting their gold, though they were that too. They were also a republic defending itself against the one disease it could not survive. The love of the crowd, concentrating in a single man. They killed a hero to protect a system. And the system was worth protecting. And the hero might really have killed it. And he was also just a man who paid a soldier's debt because it was wrong to sell a soldier. Both things. The season will not let you have only one. The poor mourned him. The histories say his own family, the Manlii, swore that no Manlius would ever again carry the name Marcus. The name that had saved the rock became a name they would not speak. The savior became the warning. The debt crisis did not end with him. It went on, the way these things go on, into the next generation and the next, until other men found other answers, some better and some worse. The quarrel he died trying to settle outlived him by centuries. That is the last thing the rock had to teach. You can save a city from the enemy outside in a single night with your own two hands, and be remembered forever. The enemy inside takes longer. The enemy inside is the city itself, and it does not have a cliff you can push it off. It only has the cliff it pushes you off when you get too close to fixing it. The rock stood over the rebuilt city, the way it always had. It had a new thing to be famous for now. Not just the night it was saved. The man it was saved by, going off the edge of it a few years later. By the hands of the people he saved it for. 12. What the ashes hold. Stand in the rebuilt city one more time before we leave it. It is a few years after the fire now. The black is gone from the streets. New wood has gone gray the way new wood does. The crooked lanes have stopped looking like a wound and started looking like a place where people live. Children who do not remember the Gauls run in them. Old men who do remember sit in the sun and do not talk about it much. The Capitoline stands over all of it. Higher than before, some say. They rebuilt the temple bigger. A city that has nearly died likes its high places to look permanent afterward. The rock that the geese saved, the rock a hero went off the edge of. It holds the sky up over the bent streets the way it always did. This is where the season ends. Not with a battle. With a city that is simply, stubbornly, still here. Think about what it took to still be here. A man drew a furrow in the dirt with a plow once at the very start. And he called the line inside it a city. That was Romulus, and that was the first founding. Then kings built it up, and a son of one of them put a knife into it. Other men threw the kings out and swore over the blood that no one would be king again. That was the second beginning, the harder one. The one that made it a republic. And then it nearly all burned. A man came back from exile and took it back with iron. A tired soldier said the wrong sentence at the right moment. And the city decided not to die. That was the third. 3 times Rome was made. Once out of dirt. Once out of the murder of a king. Once out of ash. It should not have worked. Look at how it was held together. By a fable about a belly. By a girl killed in a forum to keep her free. By a farmer who gave the power back. By geese that were too sacred to eat. By a centurion who did not know anyone was listening. None of it was a plan. All of it was people doing the next thing in the dark without knowing how the story came out. The story only looks like a story from here. To them it was a Tuesday with everything at stake. And the gates of Janus are open again. Numa shut them a long time ago in this season. The second king, the peaceful one. The shutting was supposed to mean that Rome was at rest. They have not stayed shut. They were never going to stay shut. A city that survives the way this one survived does not become gentle. It becomes the opposite. Rome came out of the fire harder than it went in. more certain that largeness was the only safety, more sure that the answer to the world was iron and not gold. It learned the wrong lesson and the right lesson from the same disaster. Could not always tell them apart. And neither can we. There is a name that has drifted through this whole season. Lightly. The way a name does when it does not matter yet. Came down from a hill town called Alba with the founders. And it has been in the city ever since. One family among the old families. Nothing special so far. The Julie. They are in the rebuilt city now, somewhere in one of the crooked streets, no grander than anyone else. Hold the name loosely. The season is over and they have done nothing in it. But the gates of Janus are open. The roads run out in every direction. And somewhere down those roads, 3.5 centuries from now, that ordinary name will change everything. It is going to become the heaviest word in the world. Not yet. Not for a long time. But the seed is in the soil, in the bent streets, waiting the way everything in the city waited. That is the thing the ashes hold in the end. Not just the memory of what burned. The seed of what comes next. Rome buried its dead and swept its streets and opened its shops. And it went back to arguing the way it always went back to arguing. About debt. About land. About who was a Roman and who only lived here. The fire did not settle any of it. The fire never settles anything. It only clears the ground for the same fight to start again. On the same spot, between the same people with higher walls this time. The fire is out. The city is up. The argument goes on. It always goes on. Writer's note. I do not read Camillus's speech as patriotism. Patriotism is love. This was arithmetic. He stood in the ashes and asked them to stay, and the reason was not the gods. It was that he had looked at every other place, and none of them was better. The hills were defensible. The river was there. The roads already led here. Love would have stayed even if the ground were poor. He stayed because the ground was good. Rome was not built on devotion. It was built on a man who could not find a better address. Next time. The gates of Janus stand open. The roads run out in every direction. Rome has stopped asking whether it will grow and started asking how far.